You're reading that wrong. No council would exile a founding species, not like this. Admiral Corvin Mayer didn't lift his eyes from the feed. The Solar Assembly's broadcast was rerouted to every secure command node Earthside and off-world. The Concord had spoken. Resolution 88 Black had passed. The screen showed the vote ledger, signed by each sector delegate. No dissenting vote, no abstention. Just black bars filling each quadrant beside Earth's name. The command bunker remained still. Chairs weren't shifting, feet weren't moving, everything slowed without stalling. Commander Velen tapped his earpiece once, then spoke quietly without turning. Orbital Wormgate access revoked, all gates responding to the Purge protocol, outbound signals being rerouted back to Concord control. That's everything outside. Neptune gone. Mayer closed the ledger screen manually. Shut down all trade station links, no guesswork, no delay. That's an order. Yes, sir. He stood, and the chair behind him rolled gently against the back wall. There was no sound of outrage in the room. That wasn't Earth's style anymore. Not since the resource war under the Martian Accord. Panic was unproductive, but strategy? It was immediate. On the left panel, Logistics Officer Darren Reyes began scrolling through reroute options. Energy exchange networks just collapsed. Cryofuel imports from Delta Lines ceased. High-yield alloy shipments from Trestar canceled mid-light. We're 2 cycles from grid imbalance if we don't compensate. Internal load share protocol, Mayer asked. Outdated. Civilian reactors aren't built for emergency redistribution on this scale. We'd black out 6 orbital sectors trying to reroute that much power. Mayer pointed toward the solar node map. Deactivate S1 through S6 satellites. Redirect all flow to internal buffer stacks. That's 90% of our solar intake, Roz said. Then stop pretending this is temporary. No one argued. They started typing. Across Earth's 8 inhabited platforms, control logs began rerouting in sequence. Small thermal spikes triggered in upper atmosphere sensors as dormant satellites cut output, redirecting energy flows inward. On Luna, surface mining halts were announced without warning. On Europa, 2 aquatic biodomes went dark as engineers flooded comms for clarification. No answers came. Commander Velen leaned closer to the central screen. Incoming packet from the Concord. Final statement. Do you want me to relay? Display the document, keep the tone analysis offline. A single statement filled the primary interface. Due to Earth's failure to comply with regional investigations and repeated obstruction of Veltrix's disaster analysis, Concord Resolution 88 Black declares Earth a threat to galactic stability. As of this transmission, all diplomatic, technological, and commercial engagements with the Terran sovereignty are hereby severed. This is permanent. No appeal will be reviewed. Mayer turned away from the screen and began walking toward the reinforced vault on the far wall. Where are you going? Velen asked, stepping forward. Mayer didn't look back. To get the only plan that ever mattered. He placed his command key into the vault reader. The system didn't ask for a second authorization. That protocol had been removed the moment Concord's vote hit quorum. The vault opened with a deep mechanical shift. Inside was a single flat terminal, dormant for 33 years. Directive Hark, Mayer said. Initiate timestamp today. The console lit up blue. It began synchronizing with all remaining Solar Assembly military networks. Velen arrived behind him. That's not a defense plan. No, Mayer replied. That's a life plan. The senior analyst entered next. Director Harkin reroutes governance authority. Are you assuming total command? I'm not assuming it. It was written into the protocol. Mayer stepped aside and let the screen finish updating. Emergency conditions. Concord Exile. In the absence of formal continuity, the highest field-ranking Terran officer assumes unilateral command of survival strategy. Ross blinked. You're declaring total internal control. Mayer nodded once. Which means I need you all to stop acting like we're still a member of anything. The room didn't applaud. It wouldn't have made sense. Instead, screens across the chamber began updating with new operational trees. Each department was now split between essential continuity roles and raw survival categories: terraform, distribution, containment, and disassembly lines. Earth wasn't going to fire missiles. It was going to collapse inward, trim everything down, and start again. One technician whispered almost under his breath, "They're really leaving us to die." Mayer heard it. He turned sharply. "No. They're leaving us to prove we don't need them." He stepped back toward the central station. "Deactivate all outgoing diplomatic channels. Scrub previous signal logs. Dismantle lunar transit relays. I want Facility Arxis back online in 48 hours. The room paused again. "Facility Arxis?" Velen repeated. "Last project we buried before Concord inspection started. Under Neptune's orbit. They called it incomplete. That's because we stopped funding it, not because it didn't work." Ross scanned his tablet. "We'd need 5 full teams to reinitialize that infrastructure. Most of the staff were reassigned during the Energy Rebalance Act. Then reassign them again. No one has a desk job anymore." Across the command bunker, terminals rerouted to local processing. A quiet systems reallocation started, one that stripped away anything not contributing to internal restoration. Mars sector factories received rerouted assembly chains. Old transport frames were pulled from scrapyards and queued for repurpose. Earth was shedding weight. Mayer walked to the observation deck. Outside the glass, the orbital gates were dormant now, still fixed above the stratosphere, but lifeless. No inbound shipments, no foreign lights, no tracking beacons. "We always thought we needed the galaxy," he said flatly. "Maybe we just needed to stop asking permission." He turned back to his officers. "Directive Harkin is not a declaration of war. It's the removal of expectation. From this point forward, Earth operates alone." Bellin exhaled. "That's going to break a lot of systems." "No," Mayer said. "That's going to force us to build better ones." The command room began transmitting the updated doctrine to all remaining Terran platforms. Civilian colonies received new parameters. Outdated vessels were tagged for recovery and retrofitting. And far beyond Earth's orbit, a dark satellite shifted quietly in Neptune's shadow. Facility Arxis detected activation across its surface. Lights flickered on. By the hour's end, the solar assembly no longer existed. Mayer stood alone at the deck. "Get me the last energy maps of Dargan Drift. If they're going to erase us, let's start building where they stopped looking. Shut down the tracking network. If we're cut off, we stop blinking on their map." Admiral Mayer stood at the center of the assembly war room, which had already been stripped of its external feeds. 2 hours ago, the entire wall pulsed with Concorde traffic. Now, only internal schematics remained. No signals in, none outbound. The gates above Earth's orbit were inert, just floating metal now. And everyone in this room knew, without energy rerouting and full structural overhaul, the colonies wouldn't make it past the next month. Mayer glanced toward the logistics pit, where technicians were compiling priority frameworks on static boards. "I want redundancy eliminated. If a station draws power and doesn't produce outcome, shut it off. We're beyond optimization. This is about carrying weight or not existing." Dr. Halric Venn, former Director of Atmospheric Stabilization for Venus Terraform Initiative, stepped through the side doors, sleeves rolled to the elbows, datapad under arm. He hadn't seen a uniform in 2 years. "I've seen the infrastructure list. We can't hold energy curves with this model. You're drawing 20% over what the fallback core can supply." "That's why you're here," Mayer replied. "You built the backup systems we ignored." Van raised a brow. "You want a full civilian scientific redeployment?" "Not a request. This isn't a war council. It's reconstruction." Ben didn't flinch. "I'll need every research center cleared of academic protocols. No papers, no testing phases, no ethics board, just application." Mayer nodded once. "Already authorized." The war room's main display flickered as the new command lattice took effect. Heads-up panels refreshed into amber grids, splitting personnel between core functions: teleform maintenance, mobile fusion routing, recycling conversion. The old Admiralty had been dissolved. In its place stood a hierarchy of efficiency. Scientists, engineers, analysts. Every combat ship now served a support purpose first. Military command was no longer dominant, it was supportive. Commander Strav Jern stepped closer, quiet as always, hands behind his back. Supply chains from the Mars belt are collapsing. We're getting resource drag from overlapping retrieval missions. Too many ships running similar paths. Centralized scheduling, Mayer said. Assigned routes based on tonnage, not habit. We're done with legacy paths. Jern tapped his pad. 3 outposts have declared independence. One's blocking access to cryopod reserves. Fill them out. We don't have room for negotiation anymore. We move with whoever can adapt. Across the solar grid, infrastructure began to shift. Venus orbitals dimmed, redirecting fusion output into Mars extraction lines. Decommissioned rigs were pulled from orbital warehouses and gutted for parts. Earth's civilian broadcasters were stripped of entertainment channels and replaced with workstream bulletins. Status indicators now reflected progress metrics, not morale. Facility Arxis, dormant since the Concord moratorium on propulsion experimentation, received its activation order. Deep under Neptune's orbit, the station's outer shell began warming for the first time in decades. Autodrones kicked online and began inspecting internal stabilizers. Rusted chamber seals were pried open, and the central corridor buzzed with automated system checks. Dr. Venn stood over the central workboard, lines of code scrolling under his eyes. The Syndral array will take weeks to calibrate. Gravity fold calibration is unstable. We're not asking it to fold space, Mayer said. We're asking it to break away from needing theirs. No wormgate dependence? Venn asked. Correct. We go where they can't trace us. Or stop us. Venn tapped into the stored blueprints. We'll need new energy protocols. The Syndral array draws uneven spikes. If we don't buffer each sequence, we risk system disintegration before we even move. Build what you need, Mayer answered. Repurpose what doesn't fight. In the lower decks, reactor bay teams rerouted lines to feed Arxis directly. Lights dimmed across unpopulated regions of the orbital ring. Hallways lost ambient lighting. Emergency backup became standard supply. Water purification on outer modules was cut to baseline filtration. Oxygen recycling units were recalibrated to function on minimal redundancy. The system didn't fail. It contracted. Dr. Venn's second-in-command Kel Arner approached the console. We're down to 19 operational relay satellites. The rest were designed for internechnic signal bounce. They're useless now. Pull them in, Jern said. Strip them down. We need parts, not echoes. Arnor nodded and relayed the task to the drone command net. As reports filtered in, small markers blinked across the internal map. Civilian colonies began uploading compliance logs. Resistance dropped. It wasn't loyalty, it was survival logic. Earth had no more votes to offer. Only structure. In one chamber of the Arxis core, teams reassembled the heart of the Syndral array. Its core processor, a crystalline waveform matrix designed to manipulate localized gravity vectors, was pulled from its casing, tested for signal decay, and reinstalled under new power parameters. The technicians worked without breaks, logged no hours, and rotated by shifts tied to energy draw timing, not circadian rhythms. This was no longer military. It was coordination on a survival clock. Jern moved beside Mayer on the upper deck. No one's asked what we're building. Mayer watched the reactor load graph stabilize. They don't need to ask. And when the Concord notices, Jern asked. They already noticed when they voted to cut us off. They just assumed we'd kneel. You think they'll move on us before this is done? People might, but by then it won't matter. We won't be where they left us. Outside the orbital window, Earth glowed darker than usual. Surface grids showed reduced output, but steady. What lit up the atmosphere now wasn't imported current. It was rerouted survival. Down in the engineering bays, a single light strip above the Arxis chamber door blinked green. Stabilizer coil 1 locked, came the announcement. Mayer exhaled, turned to the comms desk. Send the order. All secondary manufacturing units are to reconfigure for off-world colony kits. Target radius, minimum 40 parsecs. No fixed positions. They'll ask for launch trajectories. Give none. As technicians moved between stations, one young systems operator turned to Ven. Why are we expanding now? We haven't even recovered, Ven answered without looking up. Because you don't wait to grow when you're ready. You grow so you don't get erased. The heads-up displays flashed a new directive across all platforms. Forge proposal initiated. All units aligned to primary objective. A timer began. 0:13 and 42 seconds. 1. Countdown to Phase 1 launch. Mayor stepped off the command platform. Next relay, Jern. Get me vector data for the Dargan drift. We'll start where they least expect construction. If they can't trace the launch, they can't declare intent. That's the point. Stravjern didn't blink as the launch sequence began to cue. He stood inside Arxis Subdeck 9, where the gravity fold shells were already loaded into their armored bay channels. 5 vessels, each stripped of identification markers, each equipped with null broadcast hull coatings, rested inside their clamps. They weren't named, weren't indexed in Earth's fleet logs. Not a single Concord registry could identify them. Mayer adjusted the collar of his deployment jacket, worn for the first time since the Martian uprising. His eyes didn't move from the vector map on the overhead tracking grid, now recompiled for deep space projection. Each arc lit in green. Launch ready, not because of approval, but alignment. They'll notice the gravitational pulse, Ven warned. His voice was quieter than usual, not hesitant. They'll notice something, Mayer replied. They just won't understand it. The room was colder than necessary. Heat had been rerouted to sustain the core. Around them, exposed support beams and fiber tube wrappings lined the walls like veins. The launch team worked in silence, not spoken quiet, but trained restraint. Every motion was calibrated. Every console was responsive only to touch authorization, not vocal commands. Arxis hadn't been designed for spectacle. It was meant to disappear behind its results. Payload sync complete, Arna reported. His hands moved across the command slate in clipped rhythms. Jump windows locked. All 5 units confirm interior full vector stabilization. Launch when ready, Mayer ordered. The clamps disengaged. One by one, the ships shifted forward, their forward drives engaged without lighting external traces. The room dimmed briefly. Not blackness, just displacement. As each vessel moved into fold alignment, the air took on a faint static, like the interior pressure of a sealed vault. Then, with no warning, the first ship vanished. No arc, no sound, no glow. Justin's. The second followed, then the third. Each disappearance marked by the flicker of data trails on the vector grid. The fourth and fifth launched within 3 seconds of each other, folding out without crossing any known Concord lanes. Jern leaned into the side console, tapping through the afterfield resonance graphs. No trail fragmentation. Their jump markers evaporated on exit. Meaning, Ven asked. No signal return, they dropped clean. Across Earth's military spectrum, nothing lit up. No confirmation from the colonies, no beacon flares, no position tags. Only outgoing vectors, logged and scrubbed at launch. There would be no press release, no follow-up. The only thing left behind was a residual energy pocket, indistinguishable from natural solar activity. Outside, clouds began to form across the upper edge of Earth's atmosphere. Nothing unusual. But inside Arxis, the room settled around one fact. Earth was no longer static. Jern turned toward the plasma map. I want the exact relay frequency used on Vector 3. If we ever repeat that window, we don't want Concord tripping over it. Ben scratched his beard, already calculating load tolerances for the next batch. You understand what this means, Admiral. We just put assets into space that don't exist on any ledger. That makes them non-state actors in Concord doctrine. That's not our doctrine anymore, Mayer said. We don't need to play by the rules of a system that locked the gate behind us. In the lower logistics bay, crews began packing full drive core segments for secondary unit assembly. The intent wasn't expansion, it was seeding. None of the new colonies would carry flags. No official names, no declarations of territory. Only encoded signatures known to internal command. If Concord attempted to scan for them, all they would find were inconsistencies in gravitational drift. Ghosts on their nav charts. Above the staging deck, a large cargo door sealed itself. Heat scanners traced internal line activity as new construction nodes prepared for silent launch. Inside each container, atmospheric kits, sustainable habitat units, and internal energy arrays pulsed steadily. No AI ran these units. Every system used segmented, loop-isolated software designed to prevent Concord backtracing. Even the radiation shielding was fabricated from non-signature alloys. Earth was building in the shadows, but not to hide. It was removing the audience. At the edge of the control floor, a junior officer stood rigidly, staring at the empty clamps. "They're really gone?" he asked. His voice cracked slightly, not out of fear, more disbelief. "They're not gone," Jern replied. "They're just not meant to come back." Ven approached Mare again, holding a data sheet with raw telemetry. "They'll analyze the gravity shift. The Concord won't know it's a fold seg now, but they'll see the spike. That might buy us time. Or paint a target." Mare reviewed the data, then handed it back. "Let them notice. The confusion will last longer than any warning." By now, other Terran stations had begun to adapt. Beacon pings were removed from outbound cargo. Transmissions were converted to line-of-sight optical signaling only. Fleet-wide silence protocols were issued. Not silence in sound, but information. A lack of explanation. A deliberate absence. Terra Sigma, the codename assigned to this expansion, was never defined in any document. It existed only in the minds of 5 team leads, each now en route to isolated stellar coordinates. Their only shared element, an embedded signal burst programmed to release in the event of detection. The message was simple. Do not approach. That warning wasn't a challenge. It was a boundary. Buren returned to his station, monitoring the afterwave scan. What if the Concord flags the region and drops a scout team? Then they'll meet nothing, Mare answered. And nothing is more dangerous than the unknown. The deck lights dimmed slightly as Arxis began power cycling for the next launch phase. No fanfare, no record. Only one empty launch bay and a growing number of encrypted status lights on the far end of the command console. Across the remaining stations, each mission lead had already triggered their isolation codes. Colonies would operate without uplink, no status updates. No ship would acknowledge transmission requests. From the Concord's perspective, Earth had stopped expanding, which made what followed harder to explain. Mare stepped toward the launch observation deck. The clamps were still warm from the fold Gentian, the steel beneath his boots humming with residual field scatter. No engine heat, no broadcast trails, just displacement. Begin shell packing for the next 5. Same destinations? Ven asked. No, Mare said. Next vector, new sector. They won't expect a second wave this fast. You sure that's a Terran signature? Analyst Coral Veteran didn't look up from the heads-up display. His eyes twitched between the vector overlays and the propulsion trail identifiers. The Dargan Drift, a region long dismissed as gravitational dead space, now pulsed with fragmented telemetry. It wasn't a shipyard or mining zone, nothing commercial, no declared colony claims, but something had moved. 5 separate vessels, synchronized trajectories, and a propulsion wake that didn't match any known Concord drive. Not confirmed, he replied. But none of our member fleets use propulsion displacement this narrow. The trail folds into itself. That's engineered dampening, not design limitation. Fleet Coordinator Eris Thorne leaned over Vedran's shoulder. Give me the raw structure. Vedran tapped the command pad. The overlay dropped into skeletal mapping, stripping visual blur and spectrum wash. What remained was chilling. 5 arcs of energy movement with identical phase lengths. Flat at the center, skewed at the wings. No shield burn, no orbital drift. These ships hadn't accelerated. They had entered and left the drift as if it were a waypoint. Wasn't this logged sooner? Thorne asked, voice sharpened. Telemetry anomaly flagged 3 hours ago. Cross-referenced as background radiation spike, the AI rerouted it. I caught it doing back audit. Thorn straightened. Get me cross-section confirmations. I want matched traces from adjacent systems. They'll take time, Vanren said, eyes still scanning. They didn't leave a transmission, only a pulse packet. What kind? Encrypted header. 0 payload. There's no actual data, just an address string. Thorn crossed his arms. Read it. Vedran cleared his throat. 2 words. Terra Sigma. The room changed. Across the command bridge of the conquered vessel, Resolute Arbitra, voices lowered. Officers didn't yell. They didn't need to. The name wasn't registered in any public Terran archive, which made it worse. That meant it wasn't accidental, it was chosen. Thorn turned to his communications officer. Any evidence of mass relay activation? No, sir. They didn't use our gates. Then they're not bound by corridor vectors. On the main tactical board, the mapped energy path flickered. 3 seconds later, a small digital tag appeared beneath the jump trail. Vedran frowned. Sir, he said slowly. The pulse packet is replicating. Say again. It's not data, it's an embedded echo. Anyone who scans the region receives the same tag. Thorn narrowed his eyes. That's not a beacon. No, Vedran confirmed. It's a warning. He tapped the final confirmation line. The message unrolled in white text over black header. Do not approach. The font wasn't aggressive. No ultimatums, no threat index. Just a boundary. Thorn paced once. Scramble 2 interceptors. Send them sublight, no emissions. Vedran hesitated. Should we acknowledge? To whom? They're not answering. Thorn activated the command chair interface and began typing. We don't show fear, we investigate, verify, and respond as needed. This will be logged as exploratory contact, nothing escalate. Below deck, the interceptors launched on suppressed thrust patterns, avoiding forward beacons. Their paths curved through the drift, tracing the curvature of the residual jump energy. As they moved into trajectory, the pilots activated onboard signal filters. No direct broadcast, only passive data capture. The first reached the edge of the navigation grid. What it found wasn't a structure, nor a vessel. It was a pattern, a spatial anomaly, a field distortion, hovering without movement, wrapped around nothing. The distortion repeated the same embedded message in a cycle. Do not approach. No heat, no radiation spikes. Just a motionless distortion that didn't match any known cloaking tech. The pilot snapped 5 spectral captures, routed them back to Resolute Arbitra, then banked away. On board, Thorn reviewed the images. The field pulsed, but without rhythm. Its edge changed shape every few seconds, like geometry rewritten by command. Vedran stood behind him, hands behind his back. Everybody didn't hide, he said quietly. No, Thorn muttered. They showed us what not to cross. Vedran took a slow breath. What if that's not a perimeter? What if it's a test? Thorn looked up. Explain. It didn't attack. They didn't jam us. They left a marker. But not to scare us. To observe if we obey. And if we don't, then they know who's still watching. Thorn sat back. The council wouldn't like this. No confrontation, no diplomacy, just an unrequested limit imposed by a former member state. The official report would bury the discovery as unconfirmed signals from inactive space. The drift would be declared unstable for travel until atmospheric variance settled. But the truth wouldn't vanish. Terra Sigma existed. It didn't request entry. It drew a line. Inside the council archives, the encryption code from the marker was submitted for analysis. No success. The linguistics team couldn't decipher structure. It wasn't language. It was machine patterning, formatted for recognition by one system only. Terran. On board Resolute Arbitra, Thorn stood once more and looked out the viewport. The drift shimmered faintly in the distance. No ships. No structures. No proof. Just a space no longer neutral. He turned to Vedran. Prepare long-range sensors. Narrow-band pulse sweeps, 10-degree increments, low emission. Looking for another trace? Veteran asked. No, Thorne replied. Looking for how far they've already gone. Deploy first array cluster. Timeline's locked. If it drifts, we lose positional parity across the arc. Admiral Mayer's voice carried through the subspace relay net, hitting 6 construction nodes across different sectors simultaneously. Each command echo reached unmanned Terran outposts hidden in gravitational shadows of planetoids, dust fields, and debris clouds. Locations chosen not for strategic resource advantage, but because they weren't considered worth charting. In Station 7 KT, located within the Kelt boundary drift, construction crews operated beneath minimal gravity. Their suits were magnetically pinned to the station's rotating deck ring. Power cells had been routed from the dormant cargo line, stripped of all communication circuits. On screen, the command interface updated with one clear directive. Phase 4 confirmed, stationary vector initiated. An engineer floated past a packed cylinder bearing the new glyph, an octagonal symbol with a single vertical dash through its core. It meant nothing to conquered linguists. To Terran units, it represented one instruction: restricted boundary. Below the central spine, automated fabrication arms extruded graphite lattice struts, folding them inward like a skeletal bloom. Each array segment was housed within a rotating vacuum shell. As soon as the assembly reached critical alignment, mocking pins disengaged. The satellite detached, drifted 30 meters out, and ignited its cold start thrusters, non-flaring, directional-only propulsion, no radar tag, no missions. Across the drift, 11 more arrays activated simultaneously, forming an invisible perimeter around nothing. There were no weapons platforms, no beacon lights, no broadcast ping. Just passive orbital motion, held in calculated alignment by micro-corrective gyros, powered through internal decay batteries. At Terran Command Archive Node 9, a technician logged the deployment times. Each was cataloged into the registry, then scrubbed from the public net. Even Earth's internal government would not see the deployment logs. Only 3 terminals had direct access: Arx's control, Mayer's core deck, and one relay embedded inside the Dargan launch node. On the heads-up map interface, 23 glyphs appeared in sequence, forming an expanding ring around known Concord patrol sectors. Not too close to provoke response, but just far enough to require new navigational policy. In the southern sector, an unmarked shuttle docked with an aging atmospheric monitor repurposed into a control spine. The crew grabbed sublogic cords into dormant repeater stations. Once installed, each satellite began transmitting a decoy thermal pattern mimicking a depleted asteroid. If scanned, it would appear as dead mass, but once a Concorde vessel crossed the proximity threshold, the onboard triangulation AI would inject patent mismatch anomalies into the sensor data. False returns, corrupted echo, non-credible mass readings. It wasn't a trap, it was misdirection. A defensive smear campaign not aimed at destruction but confusion. In Arxis Sector 5, Dr. Halric Venn reviewed the fabrication specs. Each node deployed was designed to avoid confrontation. They had no offensive ability, no secondary systems, and minimal signature. Their strength was in ambiguity. They'll know we're building something, Venn said to Mayer through the encoded line. They just won't understand what. That's better than a threat, Mayer answered. Uncertainty lasts longer than fear. He moved to the alignment board, watching the drift patterns adjust across 3 quadrants. Engineers rotated through in shifts, none working longer than 6 hours per cycle. Efficiency wasn't the goal, it was endurance. The expansion would take months, maybe longer, but the shape was forming. Each outer array bore the same core structure: a gravity manipulator shell, passive signal buffer, and modular anchoring clamp. Once complete, these could drift into full orbital hold without human input. They weren't colonies and they weren't battle stations. They were statements. Territory defined not by force but boundary logic. Further down, crews at Relay 3RS installed radiation absorbers to replicate solar flare scatter. It would mask internal power cycling signatures from long-range observation. Near it, a secondary node deployed beacon interference pulses. so weak they wouldn't show on military monitors, but just strong enough to disrupt standardized navigation updates. A Concorde ship passing nearby wouldn't report damage, but it would log irregularities. Enough of those irregularities meant re-evaluation of patrol routes. From the Concorde standpoint, these shifts would look like cosmic variants, not sabotage, not deliberate, just inconvenient. Back inside the Arxis tactical bay, Mare overlaid all nodes onto the projection grid. A ring of small markers blinked outward, forming semi-rings across 4 sectors. None touched trade routes, but together, they outlined something invisible, a shield without walls. When the last node reported active hold, the screen locked. Transmission logs were purged. Internal file access was set to auto-direct after 6 reads. Earth now had its first outer-tier quarantine line. In Concord Fleet Monitoring Center 42V, deep within the Jeroen system, a junior observer flagged the sensor discrepancy. 3 scout paths returning from drift space had reported mismatched navigation overlays. Their starfield charts didn't align with expected markers. All 3 cited gravitational interference. The report was escalated. Within the next 2 cycles, 6 more minor shifts were logged across different regional monitors. None were classified as security risks. But the patterns didn't match natural drift. Inside Concord's intelligence annex, a split began. One faction called for recalibrating the sector charts. Another proposed deploying scout drones to confirm realignment. A smaller group quietly flagged the data for further review, suspecting it wasn't drift at all. Back in Arxis, Mare stared at the terminal. "Do we notify the colonies?" Ven asked. "No," Mare said. "This isn't for us to explain." He shut off the relay. Inside each seeded sector, the arrays spun gently in orbital hold. Small, cold, and nameless. Yet they were not dead space. They were declarations written in the language of boundaries. The next upload packet queued. Expansion nodes 24 through 31, already constructed, already launched. Launch pattern confirmed. All units advanced through Vector Corridor 7, minimal deviation, no target declared. Commander Elric Van of the Zarim Vex stood over the navigation interface, scanning the slow crawl of marker icons across the heads-up map. 38 Concorde enforcer ships, light frigate escorts, carrier-class transports, full signal discipline. No warning shots, no weapons drawn, just entry into the unclaimed zone tagged by Terran glyphs. It wasn't war, he reminded himself. It was corrective surveillance. An outdated species had seeded quarantine markers without permission. Van adjusted his trajectory overlay. Correct squadron drift. Keep the outer wing from slipping past alignment bands. If they push too far into the arc, we lose corridor containment. Flight Controller Rill tapped the inertia grid. "Sir, we're encountering navigation inconsistencies. 3 vessels are showing mild ID ping errors. 3 friend or foe beacons. Their interference dampening is old tech, they'll recalibrate." Inside the corridor, the ships flew in staggered formation. 10 clicks apart. Tight enough to respond, far enough to avoid cascade collision. Then a ripple. On the port side of Interceptor 2, a proximity flare triggered, not heat, not radar. An echo. A return pulse that shouldn't exist. The ship corrected its vector midstream, but the automated drift correction looped the signal across 3 other vessels. One banked too far, triggering a mid-layer alert on Carrier 8's shielding. "Collision detected on outer frame," Rill called. "Which target?" Van asked. "No target, no contact. The system's flagging false returns." "Override manual," Van snapped. By the time the override keyed in, Cruiser 12 had initiated a reactive flank protocol. It shifted hard starboard, slicing within 600 meters of Frigate 6. Collision avoidance kicked in, fracturing the corridor pattern. On the forward lens, the corridor array flickered. What had once appeared as clean entry space now revealed overlapping sectors. Corridor projection fields, hundreds of them. The system was reading Corridor 7 as open, but only because the enemy had folded hundreds of micropaths over each other with randomized priority. Each field emitted an artificial alignment guide. Any ship relying on standard Concorde navigational input would follow a misaligned vector. "This is not an accident," Rill muttered. Van leaned over the core board. "Shut down autocorrection, go manual on all vectors." The command issued too late. Frigate 4's command net attempted a recalibration loop. Instead of rerouting, it latched onto a false alignment pulse and initiated thruster reversal. The rotation lag triggered an override from Cruiser 9, which read the sudden velocity drop as a hostile act. A single projectile fired, automated defense, close-range rail discharge. It wasn't a full weapon release, but enough to impact. Frigate 4 lost stabilizer control and banked into Cruiser 9's flank. Within 12 seconds, 6 ships had misread each other's telemetry. Within 32 were drifting uncontrollably. Zaram Vex's bridge officers scrambled to isolate the interference pattern. It wasn't jamming. It wasn't even aggression. It was engineering. Earth had predicted their corridor selection, then buried them in false trust. "Field fragmentation is spreading," Rill shouted. "Each ship is correcting into a new field. They're looping one another's paths. It's a combat maze." Van grit his teeth. "All ships fall back. No coordination, just exit vectors." The request triggered a cascade error. As the withdrawal command hit, Cruiser 12 auto-fagged the order as non-verified. It didn't match its updated mission header. An internal safety protocol kicked in, blocking thrust. Meanwhile, Frigate 2, attempting to clear the way, activated full forward drives. Just as Carrier 10 crossed behind it to reroute. Impact. The internal explosion wasn't large, but it fractured 10 supply decks. Shrapnel flared across the projection field and caught 2 more vessels on re-entry vectors. No Earth ship fired. No external transmission came. No visible enemy. Only confusion that multiplied faster than any system could adapt. Rill slammed both hands on the console. "Their system is rewriting ours before we finish reacting." The forward observation deck lit up. Green alignment fields collapsing into scatter. Where once there were paths, now there were closed dead zones. Not traps, not mines, just emptiness. Where navigation once worked. Van snapped back to his chair. "Broadcast full retreat. Tactical blackout, get us out." The communications relay stuttered, then stopped. On the central board, a message appeared. No audio, just text, burning through the header like a cut from within. "You've removed us from your galaxy. We accepted. Now you're in ours." Not a taunt, not a threat. It read like a border sign. Van stared, his hands froze. The fleet was still spinning, ships failing, systems folding in on themselves. But the meaning of the words dug deeper than any loss. Earth hadn't counterattacked. Earth had simply built a place where conquered doctrine failed. He turned to Rill. "Broadcast nothing. Pull what we can. Anyone that escapes. No retaliation, no pursuit. Just extraction." Behind them, another ID failure pulse looped through the last ring of destroyers. Shields flickered. Navigation fell apart. 3 more vessels vanished from the board. No wreckage. No return signal. Only empty tracking tags where order once held. "Council floor override. Packet received from Zaram Vex. Origin node unknown. Broadcast content unverified." The alert struck mid-session. A red pulse ran across every tier of the conquered High Assembly's legislative amphitheater. Delegates shifted uneasily. Not from noise, there wasn't any, but from the shift in lighting. Every desk terminal, every seatback relay flashed the same signal string. Non-networked transmission, encrypted format. Earth origin confirmed. Chancellor Dreven Riss lowered his stylus. "Play it." On the upper tier, technicians routed the transmission to the center stage's embedded heads-up display. The usual council insignia blinked out. What replaced it was unembellished. Black background, no emblems. A single line of white text doctrine filled the screen. "Exile was your choice. Empire was our answer. Do not return." No voice accompanied the message. No speaker visible. The system displayed only raw signal threads, Earth's neural encryption formatting, impossible to spoof. Every delegate recognized the signature. Riss leaned forward. Timestamp? Within the last 7 minutes, the analyst answered. Origin point is untraceable. There's no path routing. Another delegate, Counselor Ardeen, adjusted his console. Is this an isolated transmission? No, the technician replied. It's looping through old diplomatic bands. Every long-range node above relay tier 6 is receiving a variant. Variants? Riss repeated. Same message, the tech explained, but phrased differently depending on region. This wasn't sent in one direction, it was mapped. Riss rubbed his chin. Pre-written? Structured to adapt to audience reception, political linguistics layered inside a threatless rejection. Ardeen exhaled. They're not asking to return. They're setting terms. Riss raised a hand. Terms imply negotiation. This is a doctrine. The chamber quieted as another packet dropped onto the central display. A visual this time, orbital projection footage. A planet-sized ring formed of unmanned structures drifting in unison. Each bore a different glyph, none matching known Terran flags, no heat emissions, no reactor bleed. Just movement, orderly and unclaimed. The tracking data confirmed the location. Outside Concord chartered Sector 41, far from colonized stars. One of the defense ministers stood. Deploy a detachment. Secure the perimeter. If they're escalating. Riss interrupted. They're not escalating. They've already built the response. We're late. In the control office of Concord's orbital strategy node, analysts reviewed a compiled comparison between Earth's old diplomatic protocols and the new broadcast. The difference wasn't just in tone. It was structure. Earth no longer negotiated. It notified. The Zaremvex's final data burst, delivered just before its command thread was lost, contained more than a message. It uploaded Earth's updated communication sequence. A logic tree, stripped of language variation, distilled into core parameters. All nodes began with the same trigger: interference equals disengage. If a Concord vessel approached any Earth sector tagged with the quarantine glyph, signal bandwidths would begin degrading, not through electronic warfare, but in compatibility. Earth's systems had evolved. They weren't resisting intrusion. They were incompatible with the Concord's network mesh. Inside the assembly, sectors began voting independently. Sector 12 rescinded all open patrol orders across the outer belts. Sector 3 moved to suspend long-range scout approvals. Sector 8 filed an internal inquiry, questioning whether Earth's quarantine markers now constituted sovereign designations. Riss watched the room fragment, not from argument, but doubt. Strategic uncertainty overpowered political will. The message hadn't threatened them. It had told them they were no longer relevant. A junior diplomat activated the translation comparator. Earth's phrase, "do not return," held no verb weighting. It was a boundary label, not a plea, as if Earth wasn't warning of violence, but declaring access denied. From the opposite balcony, an old admiral shifted in his seat. They've severed interface trust. What do you mean? Rice asked. Devil didn't destroy our ships, the man replied. They destroyed our ability to define the battlefield. They didn't win. They disconnected. Riss turned back to the main panel. A final symbol appeared, rotating slowly above the orbital footage. The octagonal glyph from Earth's outpost array. No label, no origin file, just presence. He leaned toward the desk and opened a private line. Patch me to the G-Rune observation ring. I want cross-sector surveillance removed from Sector 41 immediately. Sir, the officer asked. Scrubbing our eyes is the only gesture we have left. Down in the strategy wing, a file marked Doctrine Entry 1 was cataloged into Concord's closed registry. Access restricted. No replication authorized. Earth hadn't submitted terms. They had embedded a new lexicon, one where negotiation didn't begin. Rest stood. He didn't speak to the assembly. When he walked out, lock the final relay. After this, there's no line left open. Admiral Corvin Mayer didn't wait for acknowledgement. He pressed the authorization tab on the side panel and watched the last heads-up display screen flatten to black. The Earth Concord diplomatic chain had been severed. All channels, all access keys, all compatibility syncs terminated. Not jammed, not hidden, deleted. Affility Arxis was quiet in its own way. Operational, but stripped of ceremony. Cold surfaces, low power loops, ambient light from below-deck engineering glows. Not for appearance, but for function. Mayer stood alone in the command deck, surrounded by terminals running final sync logs from seeded sectors. Terra Sigma was complete. Behind him, Director Halric Venn stepped into view, holding a small burn case. Final batch of insignia archives. You sure about this? Mayer took the case without reply, set it on the nearby console, and tapped the ignition seal. The chamber hissed open, dozens of crests, patches, treaty symbols of Earth's participation in galactic systems lay inside. He tapped the node. A controlled arc licked across the contents, reducing decades of cooperation into a tray of ash and glowing memory plastic. Can't leave a door they might try to open again, Mayer said. Ben crossed his arms. They're already shifting patrols off our perimeter. Sector 12's council issued a pullback order 2 hours ago. People know now, Mayer said, that we're not waiting. He stepped toward the main array panel and keyed the broadcast capsule. The doctrine tablet, hard-coded, physically encoded and unalterable, slid from its recessed chamber. Mayer lifted it carefully. Smooth ceramic, embedded with unbreakable data strands, designed to survive solar flares and kinetic impact. It carried one document, one sentence. This empire requires no witness. Venn watched as Mayer placed the tablet into the transmission tube. They'll find that, someday. They'll understand it too late. Around the Arxis core, orbital data mapped out Earth's current condition. No foreign imports, no external trade, 5 colony chains active, 6 more under construction. Everyone self-partnered. All governed through internal relay links with isolated operational AI. No shared code with Concord systems. No biometric overlaps. Earth wasn't guarded. It was untraceable. Mayer turned toward the central relay bay, where his authorization keys were embedded into the control slab. He withdrew each one by hand, dropping them into the melt chute below. No digital copies. No backups. He wanted no one replacing him. You're stepping out permanently? Venn asked. I was never building to lead it, Mayer answered, just to make sure it survived. Venn said nothing else. He didn't need to. Across Earth's orbital grid, former embassy outposts had already been repurposed into solar catchment units. Every outdated treaty site had been dismantled. No heritage markers, no honor plaques, just vacuum where once stood diplomacy halls. Terran history didn't require approval. The North Belt Station 3KO finished its conversion into a seed ship dock, capable of carrying full colonization kits across uncharted systems. It bore no flag. The nameplate was stripped before launch. No registry, no anthem. Only a single statement carved into the forward plate. Non-member entity. Approach not recognized. Mayer keyed the relay for a fleet-wide ping. A single transmission ran through all Terran colonies and anchor nodes. The same 4-character string, repeated once, then deleted. EA-01. Earth Autonomous Order, first and final issuance. It wasn't designed for rallying. There would be no statues, no monuments. Only function. Down in the Arxis archive hall, Commander Stravjern sorted the last of the old tactical logs. Anything referencing Concord systems, galactic response plans, or shared codes was flagged for disposal. Beside him, encryption drones ran controlled burns across defunct interface modules. Heat flared, melted plates glowed red, then dulled to inert slag. Jern turned to Venn, who had entered behind him. I take it the Admiral won't be joining the Continuity Board? Had already signed the closure order, Venn replied. He's not taking part in what comes after. Jern offered a faint nod. Then what remains? Continuity through withdrawal. In Earth's southern orbital shell, Dockline Theta launched the final patrol frame under Directive Harkin. Not for defense, not for interception. Its only duty was perimeter telemetry, mapping gravitational waves and tagging anomalies to be avoided. No guns, no missile bays. It wasn't a warship. It was a courier of unannounced movement. On the outer rim, one ship, the Zenris 4, passed beyond the old Concorde detection curtain. The crew received no farewell. Their mission brief was etched into the floor panel. Navigate, establish, do not broadcast. They disappeared. Back at Arxis, Mayer stood on the observation deck. Earth rotated below, stable, unbothered, power grids aligned, communications tight, every movement calibrated to avoid notice. But none of it built from fear. It was evolution. A technician approached. All external compatibility modules have been purged. No Concorde protocol remains. Mayer nodded. Then we're finished. He removed his rank badge, dropped it into the tray beside the relay, and stepped away. The badge dissolved seconds later, slag dripping off the plate's edges. His final message, stored internally and never transmitted, encoded itself into Earth's central governance capsule. You chose exile. We chose empire. We won't return, because we outgrew what we were exiled from. Across conquered space, patrols shifted to new regions, not from defeat, but uncertainty. Earth didn't send soldiers. It didn't send ultimatums. It pulled away and made returning impossible. The greatest act of dominance wasn't occupation. It was the refusal to participate. Inside the transmission bunker, Earth's last shared access node went dark.